Okay, so you've all spent a day or two in class trying to do this assignment, so I'm just going to quickly run through, review how to do it, and hopefully you figured a bunch of this out yourself. But if you didn't, or if you just want to see how I'd approach it, this is the video for you. All right, so first I'm actually going to read these instructions here. Our goal is to factor the single function draw picture. So that's this whole function. Basically, everything in this file of code is the definition of the function draw picture and then one call to it. And so some of these arguments will affect like where the horizon is, that moves up and down, the height, I guess, of the snowman, and the size. I don't know. Anyway, these are all derived from the height of the drawing area. So our goal is to take this one function and break it apart, right? There's one function that goes basically 73 lines long, and we want to break it into a bunch of smaller functions so that everything gets easier to read. And as I say here in this comment, it's that the comments in the code are landmarks of finding good chunks of code to extract. So I'm going to use that strategy. And this one was made this way by me on purpose, but this is actually very common. It seems to be a very natural tendency of programmers to function starts getting too complex, and so they'll put a comment that says sort of what the next few lines of code do, and then another chunk that describes what the next bit of code does, and so forth. And it's so common. It's just one of my favorite refactorings is just find those comments and turn them into functions. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to start with the very first thing I see, draw the background. So to draw the picture, we have to draw the background, and then we have to draw the snowman. So I'm going to take this code. I'm going to go ahead and just cut it because I'm confident I'll just leave a little mark here. Remember where we cut it. I'm going to paste it in here, and then I'm going to turn this comment into the signature for this function. And I'll start with an empty argument list that we'll see in a second what those arguments will need to be. And then I put my braces around the code that I just copied. So these 3 lines of code, the comment is now gone, and they all contain, they do what they do, and they draw a filled rectangle. Now, if I were to run this right now, nothing would happen except the background would go away. So we still have the snowman, but the background went away because we took the code out that used to be right here that drew the background, and we moved it into this other function, and that function hasn't been called. So the other part of extracting the function is after we extract it, we have to call it. Now, when I call this, I'm going to get an error. And some of you probably read into this. It says down here, horizon is not defined, line 2, column 3 of code.js, down here at the bottom. So I look at line 2, and I see, there indeed is horizon. So horizon was an argument to draw a picture. It got its value from this first argument. So it's 70% of the height. So that's basically the where on the up, down axis, the y-axis, the horizon is drawn. And that was passed in as an argument. And we can actually see it's grayed out here because it's no longer used. In fact, the only place it was used was in these calls to draw the background that need the horizon. So this is really simple to fix. If draw background needs to know what the horizon is in order to do its work, we add it as an argument. Now, if we add it as an argument, or sometimes called a parameter, that means when we call the function, we need to pass the value. And since the whole point is this horizon should be the same as the horizon that was passed into draw picture, we just pass along the same value. So it may seem like they're all called the same thing. Why do we have to do this? It's a coincidence, or it's not 100% a coincidence, but there's no requirement that these be called the same thing. Like we could call this one H and this one H. And in this function, that variable is H, and we pass the value of H. And then in this function, we use the name horizon. Now, since we copied and pasted the code in the first place, that's why the names are all the same. But now, if we call this, we're back. So we have refactored the code. It works exactly the same as before, but we've replaced those 3 lines of code and the comment with a call to the function, and then we've moved the code itself out to this other function. Now you might ask, why don't we have to pass width and height and anything else in here? And that's because width and height are the two variables that come from the drawing environment. They're the width of the whole graphics area and the height. And if you notice, they aren't defined anywhere. So they're not arguments to draw picture, that we just used them in draw background, and we probably use them some other places, maybe not. But those are available to us, and we use them down here, at least height. So those are what we call global variables, and they don't exist only within the context of a function. Okay, so now we've got the basic idea. Draw the snowman logically is kind of the rest of this function. So it's actually commenting everything else in this function. So I don't want to pull that all out. Now maybe I do. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's just say, okay, so to draw a picture, we're going to draw the background, and we're going to draw the snowman, and draw the snowman is everything else. So this time, rather than cut and paste, I'm actually just going to go ahead and put in a call to this function that I'm about to write. And again, I don't know exactly what arguments I'm going to need. And now I'm closing off draw picture. And then I can just go ahead and say draw snowman. So I'm defining the function that I just added the call to. And I don't have to add a closing brace because the one that used to be the close of draw picture works fine. And I don't need this comment anymore. So, because this comment was just there to tell us what this code does. Well, now the name of the function tells us what the code does. And we can put these in either order. This is kind of mixed up in that we have the draw background, then we have draw picture, which calls draw background, and then it calls draw snowman, which is down here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll do this sort of top down, where I'll put draw picture first, and then it works however it works, and it calls these functions, and then we get the definition of the functions. So like literally the big picture, and then the details. Now we can just run this and see if we get an error. And indeed we do, because size is not defined at line 18. And that makes sense because draw picture has these two other arguments, base and size, that obviously are no longer used anywhere in draw picture, which means they must have been used in the code that we just made into draw snowman. So very mechanical. We can just say, well, let's pass those along. And if we use the same names, everything will join up again. So we're passing the values of the things that were passed in here by referring to them by their name. And then by using the same name here, everything matches up. Now, as before, if I wanted, I could rename things in one function or the other, but there's no real reason to do that. And having the same name kind of shows how things are supposed to be wired together. So now we're back in business. We've got our background and the snowman. And so now draw picture is kind of completely refactored in the sense that it's very, take this comment out, we don't need anymore. It tells us exactly what it does. To draw this picture, we need 3 pieces of information: a horizon, a base, and a size. And then we draw a background, and then we draw a snowman, and the background depends on the horizon, and the snowman depends on the base and the size. And I guess when we look deeper into draw snowman, we'll see what those really mean. So now draw snowman is still almost as long as the original function, so we're not really done with our total refactoring. Remember, I said in these instructions that we had, originally I had like 15 separate functions. So these variables are probably used, I mean, some of them are used in a lot of these different parts of code, and some of them are used only in certain things, like the butt size is obviously probably only used when we draw the butt down here. So we'll worry about the variables later. For the moment, I'm just going to pull out the code that actually does stuff. Right? Defining variables is fine. It's giving names to values. But let's just extract the code that actually does this stuff. And so this is commented to draw the head. And I guess if we actually take a look, so this draws the head, this like draws the circle and the filled circle. It's like drawing the black outline and then drawing the white inside of the circle. And then it draws the eyes and draws the nose and draws the mouth and draws the hat, torso. Okay, so I would say kind of like we took all of the code to draw the snowman. I would say maybe the head, let's say the head is like the head and everything in it, but maybe not the hat. Doesn't, I mean, this is sort of a matter of taste, how we want to split it up, but I'm going to take all of this code, cut it, put a call to draw head. We'll come back and fill in the arguments in a second. And then I'm going to go down here and define a new top level function, draw head, takes arguments that we'll figure out. And then I paste in all this code, format. And now, actually, let's look at head radius. Where is that used? Sometimes just a Command F to find where something is referred to. So it's referred to in the head, but also drawing the hat. So there's a couple things we could take from that, but so for now, let's just say, since this variable is used both inside draw head and in some code that we did not pull into draw head, namely the hat drawing code, I'm going to move this up here. So we can use it in both places. Now that means we're obviously going to have to pass head radius in, because it used to be, it's going to be referred to down here. So we're going to pass it in, so we can add that as an argument. Other variables that are referenced here are x and head y. So let's go ahead and add that, head y. I want to make x the first argument. So I guess this x is saying x is the horizontal dimension. So it's like where is this guy being drawn? And right now we can see x is defined as the midpoint, half of the width. Oops. Okay, so draw head x, head radius, head y. So now we got to come down to make these argument lists match up. And this also refers to eye spacing, head y, head radius, nose length, eye spacing, and but nose length and eye spacing, those are defined here. So this is good. This shows that like everything about the head is kind of determined from the head's radius. In fact, I'm going to swap this around just to keep things organized. So we have like the XY position of the head, and then we have the radius of the head, and then everything else I think is derived from that. So now because I reordered these arguments down here, I'm going to come back where I call this and reorder those so they match up. And I think that still works. Okay, great. And in fact, this is a little bit of a subtle thing, but in the context of drawing the head, we don't have to say it's the head Y, it's just the Y. And so I'm going to rename that symbol to be Y here. And by a similar token, we're drawing the head. Obviously, the head radius is the radius of the head. So let's just change it to radius. I could even name it R. That just makes this a little bit easier to read. So we're drawing the head. Take that comment out. Draw the circle at XY. Filled circle at XY. Same radius. Or this is a little bigger. Black and white. And then we derive the eye spacing and the nose length from the radius. And draw the triangle. And then we draw the mouth. And notice I don't even have to look at what the rest of this code does. Like this mouth is a little bit complicated. I don't know, it's doing what all is going on here to draw this little arc. But I don't have to worry about it. I'm just moving the code out. Okay, so now I've extracted draw head. And note, I didn't change the names up here because in this context of this function, there's lots of different Ys. So we got to differentiate between the head Y and the torso Y and the butt Y. Okay, so now same maneuver, copy draw hat, or cut it. I'll come down here, keep things in the same order, make a function, draw hat, paste the code in, this comment out, format, and the hat also depends on the head Y and the head radius. And since I haven't renamed it yet here, I'll leave those names the same. I think everything else comes from that. I'm basically looking for any variables that I refer to. And if they're defined here in the code that I just copied, then I have the definition. It's only the things that aren't defined here that have to come in as arguments. So now we go back to draw hat, head Y, head radius. See if this works. No, it does not. Oh, oops, draw hat. X is not, oh, and the hat also needs to know the X, so it takes the same arguments basically as draw head. And so that seems fine. And maybe you could argue that really like the hat is really part of the head in the sense that the hat's size and position is tied to the head size position. So if we want, we can just take this call to draw hat and say that should actually be part of drawing the head. So after we draw the rest of the head, we'll draw the hat. We just have to rename these two variables to be the names that we used in this function. Format, run. Okay, so now from draw, so draw picture calls draw snowman calls draw head, eventually calls draw hat. And we can take some other pieces out. We'll take the draw the torso. And really can put these in any order, but let's put draw torso here. And I'm just copying the code, putting it inside a function body, and then figuring out what variables it depends on that are passed in. So I can do, looks like X again, torso Y, torso size. Now I see. So this one is we're getting the radius from the size divided by 2. So then there's a question of, is the torso radius used elsewhere? It is to draw the arms, though it seems like maybe the arms should be part of the torso. So I'm trying to decide whether I want to define this variable here or pass in the radius, compute the radius before and then pass it in. Either way is fine. I think I'm going to leave this as it is for now, but that does point out that a lot of this stuff, drawing the arms and the buttons, that's really part of the torso. So I'm going to go back, grab that code, and make it part of draw torso. Okay, and so draw torso depends on X, torso Y, torso size. I think that's it, but we'll find out when we run it. So now we add draw torso, X, torso, Y, torso size, which is a little bit different. I might go back and make that consistent later. All right, but that still works. So far this refactoring is going pretty easily. All right, let's get the butt. Draw a butt. I'm going to guess that it's also going to take an X. It's going to take the butt Y, butt size. And so const draw butt. And I already guessed that it takes the X, butt, Y, butt size. that all works. I'm going to do the same thing in both of these functions where I'm going to rename this to just be y and rename this just to be size. It just makes this code a little bit easier. And then maybe I'll even just change this, or I could have even done size divided by 2 there. Doesn't matter. Okay, and then do the same thing here. Rename torso y to just be y. The only thing you got to watch out for when you rename variables like that is that there isn't another y already defined somewhere else in this function. But you only have to look within this function, like within this part that just collapsed. And so as long as there's no other variable named y or named size, I can rename this, and then I'll R. All right, and now with shorter variable names, some of these lines got put back as single lines. And so that makes that a little more compact. Let's make sure I didn't break anything. Okay, that's all still good. And so now our snowman, other than defining all these variables, is just these 3 lines that kind of describe what it is to draw the snowman. You draw the head, you draw the torso, and you draw the butt. And then each one of those may do other things, like the head draws the eyes and the nose and the mouth and the hat. And the torso is the circle of the torso itself, plus the arms, plus the buttons, and the butt is just a big circle. So in the interest of continuing to break this down into smaller functions, I can just keep doing the same maneuver, draw head, extract, draw, what did I just cut? Eyes. And now I got to use the name. I changed the name to radius. And by a similar maneuver, I can simplify this variable name, since it's obvious in the context of draw eyes what the spacing is referring to. So I like shorter variable names. And if I do this, the eyes aren't going to get drawn because I took the code out, but I didn't put the call back. So now I go to draw head and draw the eyes themselves. And then the eyes need the X and the Y and the radius. Whoops. Line 67. Oh, and I got to add those arguments to the argument list, the parameter list of the function, and then I'm back in business. And I'll take draw nose out. And you can put these function definitions in any order that you want, including you can put the sort of higher level functions first or the lower level ones. Really up to you. Try to be consistent would be my advice. All right, drawing the nose, similar, needs the X, Y, and the radius because the nose is defined in terms of the radius. But we can rename this variable to just length, which will maybe, nope. I was hoping it would make this line short enough to be formatted on one line. Whoops. Oh, and then we got to go back. Draw the nose, X, Y, radius. Great. Now another thing we could do, if we wanted, I'll demonstrate it with the nose, is like the way we've written it here, the nose function is responsible for the size of the nose. So if we wanted to make the nose longer, we'd make it a greater proportion of the radius, and now it's bigger, and we make it really long, it'll be giant. We could also say, hey, this function, it doesn't really care about the radius. It just wants to know what length nose to draw because there's nothing else that cares about the radius. So back where we call draw nose, we'll make it the responsibility of the head drawing function to say, you know what, make a nose that's 80% of the radius of the head. And that also gets rid of maybe one variable. We could do a similar thing with the eyes. Pass in the spacing. So we're doing 25% of the radius of the head. Radius times 0.25. And this is a way to make it maybe a little clearer to see how, like, well, I don't know if it's that much clearer. We can see the eyes just get drawn at a certain spacing. And then we can see here that that spacing comes from the radius of the head. And in the context of drawing the head, we see that what that radius is. So, because it's a little weird to say draw eyes with a radius, like radius of what? So I would argue this is maybe a little more clear. And then last one, draw the mouth. Draw the eyes, draw the nose, draw the mouth, then draw the hat, which we already pulled out. Const, draw, what, mouth? And this guy needs to know, again, the radius. I don't really know. And we got to call it draw eyes, draw nose, draw mouth, X, Y, radius. All right, that's still working. And another thing, and then we'll be almost maybe ready to wrap this up. Also, so all the functions I pulled out so far have not been removing any duplication. I've just been pulling out chunks of code so that we can sort of talk about them as one thing. They're all only called in one place. But there are some opportunities. So like one thing I noticed is that like all three of the parts of the body, the first thing we do is draw the circle, and it's this pattern of drawing a slightly bigger black circle and then filling it with white. And we do that to draw the head, and not so much for the eyes because they're black. But then drawing the torso, we do that. And drawing the butt, we do that. So we could say that's actually a common pattern. And so what are we drawing when we draw that? We're drawing this snowball, right? And the thing that differs is obviously the X and the Y and the radius. And let's just copy this one. In fact, if we look carefully, we'll probably see that all three of the places that we draw a snowball look exactly the same. We draw X, Y, R plus 2 of black, and then X, Y, R of white. And I forget what this 3 is. I think that's the line width. Anyway, so that means that we can change this, for instance, to draw snowball at the X and the Y and the size divided by 2. And then up here, the first step of drawing the torso is draw a snowball at X, Y, and R. And I think this is going to be the same thing in drawing the head. Oops, where did draw head go? This one is called radius. And part of the reason I noticed that is because these were all the old functions that we had extracted each did one part: eyes, nose, mouth, and hat. Whereas the other two were still in terms of like circles and filled circles. Whereas draw snowball is sort of in the domain of parts of Snowman. There's the snowball and the eyes and the nose, mouth, and the hat. So now this draw head kind of tells us exactly what it means to draw the head of a snowman. Draw the snowball, eyes, nose, mouth, and hat, and we're done. And then the smaller parts are where we get down to actually drawing, black circles for the eyes, an orange triangle for the nose, a curve of circles for the mouth. The hat is made up of a bunch of rectangles. So we have sort of a few layers of abstraction here, from the picture itself, which is made up of a background and a snowman. And then the background is actual stuff. And then the snowman is complex. So it's made up of a head, a torso, and a butt. And now that head radius is only ever used to pass into here, that makes me think we can go with, make this consistent with the other three, or the other two, and pass the size in, which means we're now passing in not the radius, but the size. So we can do the same thing as we did in the other. Take the size, I'll name it radius size divided by 2, and then I'll rename that R, just to be consistent. And I made a variable because I'm going to pass it a few different places. And so now, what have I not done? I can do the same thing. All right, well, let's go ahead. Actually, I'm going to leave that. This video is long enough. But you can imagine, not quite done here. Can extract the arms, like the draw arms, from draw torso, and then draw the buttons. So that's at least 2 more functions. Maybe there's a way to make a function to draw one arm, like one function to draw an arm pointing one place or another. Like we'd have to look at what the differences are here. It looks like this negative. Actually, let me demonstrate that. Just because it's, yeah, that's another slightly more subtle technique. So first I'm going to do the buttons because those are easy. Const draw buttons. Paste the code in. What does the button needs? It needs to know the X and the Y and the R. All right, the buttons still work. And now what I want to do, I'm gonna copy this for a sec. Draw one arm, and let's look at, so I got an X and a Y and an R. And then the way this code works is it figures out X1, like where the arm starts, which looks like the X, which is like the center of the torso, plus some part of the radius. And then the X2 is going to be farther out, and then the Y. So this is, right, so it's basically getting the 2 pairs of points to draw the line. And so we just copied this code. So I can say, oops, draw one arm, X, Y, R. I got to do one thing down here since this code before reused the X1 and Y or X2 variables that were declared here. Now I got to redeclare them just so I can not change all the code at once. All right, that still works. So that draw one arm works. Now what my goal is there a way that I can change this function so it can also draw the other arm? And if we look, these lines are the same. Everything is the same. The only difference is the value of X1 and X2, like the one here and the one here. And the only difference there is This is x plus r times 0.6. This is x plus r times 0.6 times -1. And 2.35 times -1. So it's basically, this is times -1 and this is not, which is the same as multiplying by 1. So let's add a variable we'll call direction, and we'll just multiply by that. Now, so in this case, we should pass 1, and this should still work exactly the same. But now we should be able to draw one arm x, y, r, -1. And now this code with -1 as the direction will behave the same as this code. So I can delete that. And I still get 2 arms. So now I've got slightly less code because I have one function that can draw an arm in either direction, and I call it twice, once to draw each arm. And I could wrap these up in a single function called draw arms, but that maybe seems excessive. So now torso is all boiled down to pretty much its smallest component parts. Draw hat, makes a bunch of variables and then does its thing. Let's rename. Actually, I didn't rename these variables because we're talking about a hat. And so it's maybe not obvious that like y and radius are the y and radius of the head that the hat is being put on. So it's kind of maybe better to leave those names what they are just to make it clear. I don't know. Matter of taste. So now have we done everything? So we've got draw picture, draws the background of the snowman. Draw the background is pretty simple. Draw the snowman. I guess we were looking at these variables, but not too carefully. And the meat of draw a snowman is draw the 3 parts of the body. Drawing the head is pretty complicated, but it's boiled down now to drawing the 5 parts of the head, including the hat. Draw eyes, draw nose, draw mouth are kind of primitives, as is draw hat. Then draw torso, slightly less complicated than the head, but has a few parts. And then draw butt is basically just draw the snowball. And we could, at this point, go back up here where we call draw butt and just call draw snowball, but it's fine. There's not really too much of a thing as too many functions. So I would say, and now let's count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I said I had 15 originally. So, I don't know. Maybe I draw a background into like draw sky and draw ground or something. But this seems fine. This is way more manageable. So like our longest function is probably draw snowman itself, which is mostly just variables getting set up. And now that, I guess head size is used a few different places. Yeah, so I'm looking for opportunities to like variables that are only used in one place I could maybe get rid of, but these all seem to be used in quite a few places other than proportions. And this stuff I did not explain. This is a trick that I haven't taught you guys yet this year, but don't worry about it. This is the way to take apart an array. Okay, that's it. Sorry. So this has gone slightly longer than I meant, but hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea how to go about breaking some code down into smaller functions. All right. Thanks for watching.